is Mark Gunn Media.
Hit it!
Welcome to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm your host, Mark Gunn. The views expressed on this program are those of the host and guests and not necessarily reflective of anyone or any entity associated with this broadcast. This episode, Black mental health and why we aren't talking about it. We are back after about a 6-month layoff because I had to focus on some other things. One of those things being appointed as the Vice President of Programming for Aircom Media. That is a radio station group here in Louisville, Kentucky that consists of 5 radio stations and 2 TV stations. And one of those stations, I'm also the morning show host of, WLOU, which you can stream online at WLOUFM.com. I wanted to make the first podcast back very important, and in light of what happened with Will Smith and Chris Rock during the Oscars, I couldn't think of anything else other than Black mental health that was more important. So what you're about to hear is a rebroadcast of the morning show that I did back on Wednesday, the 20th. We call it the WLOU Live in Louisville Mental Health Break. Hopefully you'll get something out of it. It is about time to have a very important conversation regarding Black mental health. And this all started with the incident between Will Smith and Chris Rock at the Oscars. But before we do that, we do need to meet our guests. Cassandra and Dr. Kylan Gray. Good morning, folks. How you guys doing?
Good morning. We're doing great. Good to be here. Thank you for the invitation for us to be here to have this good conversation.
Thank you for being here for us. Just so folks can get to know who you are, let's talk about your educational background and how you got started in the whole 9 yards. Ladies first, Cassandra.
So my name is Cassandra Gray, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and also a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor. And I'm also the CEO of Creative Spirits Behavior Health. It's a behavior outpatient mental health facility that's located now new in the west end of Louisville. We're at 2100 West Chestnut, also an office in Middletown and an office in Shelbyville. And so we're excited to be able to serve and help provide mental health, substance abuse services for our community.
All right, Dr. Gray.
I'm currently interim pastor of First Baptist Church of Jeffersontown. For the past 15 years, I've served as Dean of Community Life at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Prior to that, I was 35 years pastor of the New Mount Zion Baptist Church in Shelbyville. I hold a Master of Divinity degree and Doctorate of Ministry degree from the Louisville Presbyterian Seminary.
All right. So the reason why we wanted to have this conversation because, A, it's something that we don't talk about in our community. As a matter of fact, you hear it in households. We don't take this stuff outside our home. We deal with it here. Take it to the church. But there's a whole lot more to it. So just with your level of education and dealing with these from the spiritual realm and the scientific realm, how do these myths and misconceptions get started?
Well, that's a lot of response that's beyond the time that we really have. But suffice to say, many of the realities of mental care and spiritual life has a lot to do with the historic systemic institutional experience of racism within our country. Mm-hmm. So you pair up the black folk being completely X'd out of the ability to do therapy, because we didn't do therapy for a lot of times because we couldn't afford it. Right. Historically, therapy was not designed for people of less economic means. Mm-hmm. And in the history of our country, particularly African Americans, were completely X'd out of much that has to do systemically and institutionally with benefiting from some of the benefits that we have. Plus, we have the Tuskegee experiment that happens years ago, and we still, many African Americans, what that inculcated within our genes and in our DNA, passed on intergenerationally, is the mistrust of systems. You know, you add that to the way social work systems seem to, from the perspective of many African-American families, invade black life, the ways that the black family has been broken up. You know, it's just a whole lot of antecedents that add to the reason why black families tend to not pursue therapy. Add to that the mistrust of the church and religion that has existed over time because of the church trying to do all that we can to encourage families in the midst of this racism that we experience, develop the trust of the church. So now the black church will trust the black pastor before any other type of helping profession, and that still exists in some sense today.
And Dr. Joy DeGroy speaks about post-traumatic slave disorder.
Yes.
And you have just bundled all of that into there.
Yes.
So you couple the mistrust of systems, you couple the issues with the black church, and you also couple with just a not knowing, because I've in the research that I've done on the issue, in addition to the generational trauma that we deal with, if you go more into the scientific realm, you've got some things going on with chemical imbalances that could be affecting our mental health as well, right?
That's correct. One of the things that I think is important for us to highlight is the impact of childhood trauma. And I think our research today is allowing us to be able to take a peek now to see the major impacts that it has had or is having on our adults today. When we have childhood trauma and it's not resolved, we carry a lot of different issues in a lot of different areas, in our brain development, in our relationship areas, in our physical health, with our emotional health. I mean, we carry a lot of different issues that are unresolved, that has happened developmentally along the way based on trauma that we've experienced. What
would be some examples of childhood trauma that could...
So some of the basics would be if we've witnessed violence, which, and as I say these, it's like, oh my God, like we're like to the nth degree with that. Right. But if we witness violence, separation, rejection, abandonment, looking at drugs, alcohol, not having adequate safety in our homes, not having adequate things that are needed like food, clothing, not having someone there to be able to care. So some of those would be some of what we call little T traumas that happens to kids growing up developmentally, which actually impacts our ability to assimilate in some areas. So, emotionally.
So an example might be of a little T trauma. Maybe you had a car accident and you were on a bridge. You recovered from the accident, no physical scars, no apparent mental scars, but for some reason you have this feeling of dread anytime that you cross a bridge.
Yeah. Now that's a big T trauma.
That's a big T trauma.
Yeah, that would be a big T trauma. Little T trauma would be like my father left.
Okay.
My father was in jail most of my life. I witnessed drug deals on the corner. I witnessed a lot of substance abuse. I experienced some domestic violence and witnessed it in my home. Maybe it didn't happen to me, but mama and dad fought all the time.
Right.
So those are traumas that impact us developmentally. So, yeah.
And those are things that you do often see in a lot of households, period.
Yes, sir. Yes,
all right.
Sir.
So because I know there's no timetable exactly as to when these things will manifest themselves in a mental health episode, are there any particular red flags that you look for, or is there any particular trigger that could trigger an event, or it could just be something that happens out of the blue?
It could be something so when we talk about trauma, we take a look at the impact that it has had on the individual. So say it's my father left or my mother left, or I witnessed a murder.
Right.
Okay, so with that, there's feelings that are emotions that are left, right? Our response to trauma is either we fight
or
flight,
right,
or freeze.
Which brings us to something that you and I were talking about with the Chris Rock, Will Smith situation.
Yes.
And you pointed out that when Rock got slapped, he didn't react right away. He was frozen.
Yes.
And there was something legitimate to that related to childhood trauma.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
We talked about him during his developmental ages of childhood being bullied his entire life, and
viciously bullied.
And comedy for him, right? Comedy for him was his remedy. If he could make you laugh, you wouldn't beat him up.
Right.
If he could joke on, make jokes or whatever, you wouldn't come after him. But he was viciously bullied, fought, beat up, put in trash. He talked a lot about that and how he found peace in comedy, but comedy also helped to save him. And so when that happened,
right.
We all saw, the world saw the triggering event. He was totally stunned.
Yeah.
He was totally shocked and couldn't move for a moment. Only thing he could say was he just
smacked the out of me. Right.
Yeah. And then, just trying to get himself back together. But the entire time, if you watch the video, he was stunned even after he gave the award. Mm-hmm. Even after, he was about ready to walk off stage, he did not know what to do. He was totally stunned.
And when you have been bullied, if you've had an experience of trauma, which is a big T trauma of being bullied, and have been bullied over a period of time in your life, it insets such a palpable fear that when you're triggered, that fear is felt as if you had never left the playground, or as if you never left the place of the initial trauma event. Just like you talk about the bridge. Each time you go across the bridge, you experience the same cognitive and emotional experiences as the initial event or the successive events. We hear that from victims of sexual trauma. When there has been household rape or sexual assault in the home where you're supposed to be safe over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. So the brain protects the human us by creating these ways of triggering. So when we experience a trigger, you see on the outside this person has frozen, or they completely take out and run, or they get angry and they get aggressive and attack. But they have just gone back to that time. They're no longer in the present moment. And you saw that with Chris Rock. Right. You saw it in his face. You saw it in his body language. It was hard for him, and he mustered himself through. But it was hard for him to collect himself, because when you're frozen, there is no emotion at the moment. There's no response other than you're just there and you're hoping. But what I saw in his face was outright terror. Yes. Outright terror. Yes. And what do I do? Am I safe? Is there anywhere in this place that I am safe?
Right.
Once again, we are talking with Cassandra and Dr. Kylan Gray. This is the Live in Louisville Mental Health Break. And we're talking about past traumas, childhood traumas that can trigger current mental health episodes or events. And it's like, what was the term that I learned years ago? It's like these issues are filed away in a file cabinet in your brain, and then whenever the trigger happens, it accesses that file rather quickly.
That's right.
And then how you deal with it is something else that's altogether different. Tell you what, we're going to take a little bit of a break, get some bills paid, and on the other side of the break, we're going to talk more about what to do if you're having an episode, what to do if you're struggling, things that you can do as a family, as an individual, to help yourself with any sort of mental health issue. Live in Louisville, the original soul of Louisville, 104.7 WLOU.
If you're an advertiser, one of the most important things about getting your message out is actually standing out from the rest of the crowd. If you're listening to this program right now, this is where you'd hear your commercial. As an exclusive sponsor of Gunshots Straight from the Hip, your commercial is professionally produced and gets a longer shelf life based on your needs. Gunshots Straight from the Hip is a unique and compelling program unlike anything else in the marketplace. Episodes are available for download on iTunes, TuneIn, and MarkGunMedia.com. And depending on how you tailor your message, the potential for new and repeat customers is that much greater. Best of all, it's extremely cost-effective. If you'd like more information on how you can be a sponsor of this broadcast, call Mark Gunn Media, Inc. at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. 888-407-0283 or log on to markgunmedia.com. For downloads of this and past episodes and information about all the multimedia services we offer, log on to our website at www.markgunmedia.com. That's markgunmedia.com.
Welcome back to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm Mark Gunn, and once again, you're listening to a rebroadcast of the Live in Louisville mental health break that took place on Wednesday, April 20th on 104.7 WLOU AM and FM in Louisville, Kentucky.
The conversation about black mental health continues with Live in Louisville's Mental Health Break with special guest Cassandra and Dr. Kylan Gray of Creative Spirits Behavioral Health Services. Now with a new West End location, 2100 West Chestnut Street. For more information about their services, go to creativespiritsonline.com. Brought to you by AARP of Kentucky, Family Health Centers, Alante's Jewel Counseling, and Pick Shoes on the original soul of Louisville, 104.7 WLOU.
And we have been talking about trauma and those events that can lead to mental health episodes as we take our mental health break. And one of the things that you mentioned, Cassandra, was murder. And this is something that I'm extremely familiar with. So I had an episode several years ago. I don't know if you remember, there was a double homicide at the Prius nightclub over in Jeffersonville. I was caught in the crossfire. And even though I wasn't hit, I did see one of the bodies that died right behind my car. Mm-hmm. So the trauma of that, it took me out for several months. Being a radio personality, you have to be accustomed to being around crowds of people. So I think I had the presence of mind with my wife, or girlfriend at the time. I noticed there were some things that weren't right about me. One, I couldn't stand to be around crowds. I love crowds. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Two, firearms. I've always had a healthy respect for them. I've trained with them the whole 9 yards. All of a sudden, couldn't stand to be near them. And it was almost a paralyzing fear. So I was able to get help. And part of what I went through, and I think part of what happens with some people, is that I think the biggest motivator for me was the fact of feeling powerless. Mm-hmm. Above everything else, I absolutely hated that. I wanted to get my power back. Mm-hmm. So one of my resolutions after months of therapy is I went and got my concealed carry permit. And I've had one ever since. Okay. But now I've got no problem with crowds. I have no problem with firearms. But I was able to get the help that I needed in order to fight an issue. And I think there's a level of self-awareness that I had that enabled me to realize that, hey, something's not right here. Mm-hmm. I need to get help.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But that doesn't happen with a lot of people, does it?
I think that's one of the main components when we start talking about trauma, that feeling of powerlessness. Mm-hmm. That piece right there, that I can't get around this. There's no hope. There's nothing I can do. And that's the piece that impacts us emotionally. Like there's intense fear there, or there's intense hopelessness mm-hmm. there, or there's intense that I'm not going to ever get over this, or this is going to always be where I am. And that's one of the biggest pieces. But that powerlessness, I think we should parse on that, talk a little bit about that, because that piece there, when you're dealing with a kid that's coming from a home there's been violence, I feel powerless. I feel like I can't, there's no way. Or you're dealing with a mom mm-hmm. Who is in an abusive situation and feels powerless. And a lot of people say, well, why do you stay? Well, I'm staying because, this is I have a home. I have, there's money, and there's the care and that's here. But the violence itself has that person feeling powerless, mm-hmm. that I can never get over this. Or you're dealing with someone that is dealing with, has witnessed a lot of violence within the community.
Right.
And feeling like, this is never going to change. It's almost like feeling like you're boxed into this situation.
You're stuck.
And that's how that feels. And so when we start talking about dealing with that emotionally, being able to understand that that's the piece that we have to help the person to overcome and help the person to manage. I tell all my clients, what we're going to do is we're going to teach you how to manage those emotions when you feel that come up. And what's so crazy about trauma, as you described, what took place in witnessing violence in that magnitude and that powerlessness that you felt. It may not be the same thing that happens to you, but it could be something totally different. But if the feeling is that same powerlessness, it touches that trauma, right? And so those are the things that we have to figure out. What are those things that continue to trigger? What are those things that continue to impact you in that arena? And then we start working on the thinking and the emotion on that. And so those are some of the things that we do. We utilize EMDR.
Break that down for like I'm a 5-year-old.
Okay, so with EMDR, I love it. It's one of the ways that we can work on trauma and help people to be able to move forward. And what we do is we help the person by using bilateral motions. Bilateral meaning, so with EMDR, what we understand is when a person is emoting, that emotional core center is moving like this.
Right.
So with EMDR, we try to use what we call a bilateral motion to help a person to bypass that
internal motion. Okay.
Yes. So we have them go back and forth with the eyes, moving back and forth. That's moving, and what we do is we're moving that mind, moving that those thoughts and those emotions.
So the focus is allocated to the actual physical motion. Even though you're feeling what it is that you're feeling, you're navigating through it, but you've got something else that helps kind of smooth the path that you're going down.
So we do it bilateral. We can do it with tapping. That's bilateral movement.
Right.
We can do it by walking, stepping. We can do it by patting here. Anything that's going to help you to move that mindset and help you to and then what we do is we talk you through. We help you to be able to look at what you're feeling and what your thoughts are, and we help to try to implant by saying, so what could make that, tell me what's the opposite of that? When you feel better, what does that feel like?
So what is it that makes you feel better when you're dealing with?
Or what some of the good things that makes you, when are the times that you do feel safe? Tell me some times that you have felt safe. Tell me some times about your peaceful place. Tell me some times that you've set aside a place that's been peaceful. And then when that person is able to acknowledge that, then we talk to that person about what does that feel like? And then with the bilateral movement, we're helping them to plant,
to get to that place.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And so with that bilateral movement, we're talking to them about that, and we're saying, okay, just think about that for a second, and then go with that.
And this dovetails to when you mentioned that peaceful place. For some people, Dr. Gray, it is within the spirit. The spirit, it's within their spirituality.
Yes.
So how does that? So with this exercise. And I'm imagining that once they've identified that peaceful place, there is a spiritual component that you can navigate to. Am I right or wrong?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. For our practice, we utilize the faith tradition that people have with our clients. So we don't try to impose upon them a perspective or a spiritual perspective that they should have.
Right.
We are Christians, and we are faith-based in everything that we do. But so is everyone that steps through the door, even though that faith may not be ours. And so we try to learn about their faith orientation and use the strengths of their faith orientation to help to include with all of the different types of therapeutic approaches that we do. So that faith plays a big role. In fact, outside of the spiritual, every human being believes. we believe something. And so part of what we do with the reprocessing with EMDR and the other therapeutic approaches we use, we try to lift up with, as we look at and peel the onion layers back.
Right.
At some level, we have to get to the place of belief. What do I believe about myself in relation to other people? What do I believe about myself within the context of my world and where I am? That's a big piece right there.
And I would say too, the other thing about the Black church, the one thing about us, I'm a therapist by trade.
Right.
But the Black church has been doing therapy the entire time.
Yeah.
So think about it. Lift up your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Clap your hands.
EMDR.
We're shouting.
Do a praise dance.
You're tapping.
Do a praise dance.
That's bilateral reprocessing all along.
So for us as African Americans, we've been participating in therapy. That's why our faith tradition is so important to us. Where others may have gone through, and I'm not saying don't go to therapy because
right.
But our church has served as in that purpose for us and with us.
Light bulbs are coming on,
Yes.
and I love this.
Yeah.
So here is where the disconnect for me comes in.
All right.
As I'm listening, I think if the church were more aware of what they were doing as it relates to mental health, it could be communicated to parishioners a whole lot better. And that that whole stigma when it comes to mental health in the church, because I'm sure you've heard it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You don't take it to a doctor, you take it to God.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
for those of us that are, that may be a little cynical, and there are those of us that are out there.
Yeah.
What is it? Faith without works is just a wish.
Right. Yeah.
So while the church is doing the work, I don't know if they realize what it is that they're doing. And if they do, it's a bad PR thing because they're not touting the benefits of what they're doing. Yes, it's all in the spirit. And it's all in the practice of worship and praise, which is beautiful.
Right.
But that layered component to healing is something I think a lot of churches need to play up too.
It starts with the training of pastors and the training of ministers, because many a times, and within our seminary, we have a marriage and family therapy program, but there's not a lot of pastors that participate in that. We're not trained to frame our theology within therapeutic frames.
Right.
And that takes a skill set to do that. It's similar to most colleges where professors are expert in their field of study, but you don't get in PhD school. They don't teach you how to manage behavior in a class.
Right.
So when you have post-COVID realities coming along and everybody is mistrusting everybody, and there's this high increase of tension, it creates developments within the classroom that a lot of professors need additional training to do. Same with pastors. Many pastors, we're not trained on therapy.
Right.
And we're not trained to understand how even the sermons that we preach, how it has therapeutic value, how the things that we do within our week-to-week exercise can be very therapeutic. But the proof is in the pudding. Black folk are still alive because of the church.
Amen.
And we've survived slavery and Jim Crow and Jane Crow and all kinds and continuous efforts, even now, to minimize black life. And although there's plenty of challenges in the black church, and I would be the first to say that we've got so many challenges that we need to deal with. But our people have been able to survive because of what happens within the walls of those churches. And so what we're seeing is an increase, a couple of increases we're seeing. We're seeing more and more pastors that are no longer framing that or giving energy to the stigma. They're working within their congregations to reduce the stigma. And they're doing that, the second increase, by bringing more black therapists within their congregations to talk to their congregations. That's happening more and more. So kudos to the African Americans who are listening, who are studying to be licensed social workers, clinical social workers, licensed psychologists. There's so much work out there to be done. And there's more work that churches across the country are doing doing to bring therapy and ministry together in conversation together.
Right.
It's a welcome change that's happening within the country right now.
And an O can do that. Just an O.
Yes.
In church, you're as a pastor is ministering, or as a minister is ministering, and you get in your mind like whatever that trouble is that you're going through or that you've gone through for the week, and then they say just lift it up and give it to God, or just shout it out. Everybody in the congregation is shouting, "Oh!" That therapeutically, that's releasing that central nervous system. That has a release on the parasympathetic nervous system. Those are the things that we talk about in therapy, of looking at that. But we're not telling you in church that you're releasing that.
Right.
We're telling you you're letting that thing go. You're clapping your hands and you're shouting unto God.
That's what shouting was all about.
There's a release.
And I joked with you about scream therapy, something that I've done on the air with listeners from time to time.
Yes.
And on the surface, while I'm trying to be funny, I know exactly what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So there you go.
Well, back in the day, our foreparents moaned.
Yes, they did.
There was moaning,
Yes.
Where words couldn't fit, but the moaning is that same
Yes.
parasympathetic release.
Yes.
Right.
Within this. That's how they survived.
Yes.
The spirituals that sang about the trauma. Sang about, nobody knows the trouble I see.
Right.
That's
and
right.
what that does is not just sad songs that make you sad, it gives release to what you're feeling, the pain that you're feeling. And so when we think about those persons who don't have any type of spiritual outlet for their pain, they're at a great disadvantage from other than being gathered with people that understand pain collectively as a people and can give witness to that. So running around the church when the music gets hot, doing a praise dance, all of that helps us spiritually, but it also helps us therapeutically.
Right. I mean, we make jokes about it, but now that we're actually peeling the layer off of the onion, I think it's something that we need to take a little more seriously. So,
and the therapeutic world tries to take credit for that, which, again, I'm a therapist, but I'm also a minister, of the gospel. And that's been around, that's been around forever.
Right.
Ever since the black church has been around, we've been doing therapy. We don't know it. We don't call it such, but that's what it is.
But the connection at some point needs to be made, and it sounds like the connection is finally being made.
Yes.
Once again, we are talking with Cassandra and Dr. Kylan Gray with the Live in Louisville Mental Health Break, and we're covering some interesting ground here, because one of the things that we wanted to do was to break down a lot of the misinformation and the myths and the stigma when it comes to mental health in the black community, and we've been doing that. And one of the things that you both touched on that I'm seeing a lot of, and I'm seeing it especially on social media, is the rise of black therapists.
Yes.
And it's like one of the issues that a lot of people talk about, and the things that one of the things that keeps them from going to a therapist is the fact that I need a black therapist and I can't find one. What I'm learning is they out here.
They're out
Yes,
there.
sir.
Yes. We out here.
Yes, sir.
So
and in numbers.
Right.
Yes.
So
and in numbers.
Why does it seem like we don't know that you guys are out there, or that there are a great amount of, why does it seem that it's so hard to find you?
Well, the biggest thing right now is, and I shared this. I had applied for a grant through one of the television to bring some awareness to what we're doing. And the biggest thing is there's not a lot of marketing. I mean, so for that, with the smaller therapists and the smaller shops, the marketing piece of that. But the thing that's changing that is social media.
Yes.
Social media is the game changer for us that are African American that are in this field. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that the cultural significance that we bring, because we bring our culture in with us, and as we're helping people to be able to heal, we're allowing them to bring their culture in. So it's not anything foreign that you have to bring in, or it's not anything sterile that you have to, for a while the field was pretty sterile. And there was no
no consideration given to somebody's
to anybody's cultural background or significance.
Or how that cultural
Correct.
background plays into their
Correct.
mental health.
And so this right here, for us, that's some of the things that we bring. And in Louisville alone, there are so many of us. And the beautiful thing about us is we're all different. So you have your LPCs, and then you have your licensed social workers, and then you have your marriage family therapists. So all of us are different in our approach, but the same in serving our people.
And one of the approaches that has been different, and this is something that I've been enthusiastic about this. There's a program where barbers are being introduced to mental health counseling. As a matter of fact, we've got one here that has been a part of the program, and it's been pretty much a pilot. And it just makes sense because the barbershop for black men is our sanctum sanctorum.
That's the place.
And
yes,
we cut up. We cut up. I'll put it that way.
Absolutely.
But we also get into very deep conversations that we may not otherwise have with our wives or girlfriends or people outside of that extended social circle. So, is there any sort of, other than the people that are putting on these types of programs, what kind of synergy is there within the counseling community with a lot of the barbershops and barbers that want to be a part of this?
I know there are several barbers that have that are actually a part of this. And if I'm not mistaken, Daryl Turpin.
Yep.
He is an African-American male. He is a therapist. Damon Cobble. He's an African-American male. They have a movement that's been working within that realm. The state has picked that up and has been offering what they call mental health first aid training for individuals, and that's where you can go through and get the basics. Like if you're in a leadership position, you can go in and get just the basics to be able to identify if it's depression, to be able to identify if it's anxiety, and then if it's beyond what you can do, then you're able to, to refer them out. We've been hitting the trail. A lot of us that are African-American therapists have been hitting the trail in the church, within the church setting, within businesses. I know we're doing some things with Amped and Dave Christopher with the RTBI movement that's going on. So we're providing mental health coaching for those that are in business. I know Alicia Durrett, she is working with the Louisville Urban League, and she's pulling therapists. It doesn't matter the discipline or where she's pulling African American therapists in to be able to help serve the greater good. And so she's working with Louisville Urban League. We're working with Goodwill and helping to do that. So we're trying to show up in areas where our people are, so that people will know that we are, here and, that we are available. Kim Moore, with the work that she does in the community with Game Changers, and also
I know Kim very well.
So she, and then Reverend Snarden, and then a lot of the pastors. A lot of our pastors have actually signed on. We have pastors that send their couples and send their people. So the awareness is happening on multi levels, within different segments within our community, and it is happening. And it's happening quickly because people are becoming more aware that we are here.
But one segment that it's not happening in, law enforcement.
Well,
let's be real.
Well,
part of the police reform package that's being talked about not only locally but nationally is having mental health counselors go on runs with police officers. I mean, how many stories have you seen just within the last year?
Yes.
The one that comes to mind is the young man who was sitting, and his counselor was sitting there with him, and there was a police officer maybe 50 yards or however behind a pole, and he shot him. They asked the cop why he shot. The cop said he didn't know. So there is a huge disconnect when it comes to law enforcement and dealing with mental health. So you were about to say.
Oh, no, I agree. I agree about the disconnect, especially when you look at the national trends. But I believe locally there's been kind of small movement that's trying to come about with the local police, with allowing social workers. And I know that the city has applied for some money for that, to have social workers actually ride along with some of the law enforcement. Now, the thing about it, you have law enforcement that are open, just like everybody else.
Right.
You have law enforcement that are not. You have law enforcement that believe that the law is the law and this mental health thing is a bunch of nothing. And then you have those that have the buy-in. And I think that's kind of where we are within our community right now, that, and we know that we need that, because it's us that's out here dying and getting shot.
Right.
So we know that there's definitely a need. And I think that within this community, there has been at least an ear, and there has been some motion within Metro government and within the Louisville Police Department here.
You're also talking about culture change.
Yes.
And culture
And
takes time to shift.
Yeah.
The paradigm shifts don't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So when you have a culture like in law enforcement vested in the punitive aspect of law enforcement that has gained over centuries trust in that approach. That's a brain change to be able to say, okay, we need to look at these people that we're used to seeing as criminals as mentally ill. That's a mental shift. That's a culture shift. So that type of change and approach has to be supported by a culture that accepts that. We've been talking about that with the church, that the church is now beginning to see mental health as not being anti-church. And there's still a lot of churches that still believe that, still a lot of church cultures that has not made that transition yet. But we're talking about a culture change. We're talking about a culture shift. And so the episodes that we see within law enforcement agencies across the country that are actually trying the pairing of social workers and mental health professionals with law enforcement, they're far and few between, because it's a culture shift. So there's not a lot of trust that has been vested in that. But that's why we need legislation, so that we can help people to develop that trust, because our lives are at stake. And those of our sisters and brothers who have legitimate mental health issues, that part of the symptomology of that mental illness is violence, is the paranoid, high anxiety, and the things that they do as a result of that high anxiety. We've got to be able to help law enforcement officers to know that, and to be able to develop a way whereby they can identify that, or at least include that as part of the possibilities before they begin to start going into a violent way of enforcing the law.
And I think that's going to happen on all levels, within our education system, within our judicial system, within our justice, within our law enforcement. That kind of shift is going to have to be supported and be understood, by all, and be accepted, so that change can come. We're still fighting for critical race theory to be taught, in the school system. Just being able to understand, about slavery,
actual history,
the real history,
real history.
Yeah, and so just that is causing a shift. And then I also believe the uprise of the conservative movement too.
That's a whole other show.
I know, but if that's who's in charge of helping to make the change, then there's a lot of dialogue that's going to have to take place with that to create an understanding.
Speaking of which, we're going to take one more break, and we're going to have more dialogue about Black mental health. We'll get into some resources, some things that people can do on their own in order to help themselves and to help somebody else that may need help, all right?
You're listening to a rebroadcast of the April 20th episode of Live in Louisville on 104.7 WLOU. More after this.
Hi, this is Tony Fields.
And I'm Mark Gunn.
For over 70 years, WLOU has been your radio station.
The People Station.
And in that time, we've shared some incredible triumphs.
It's all over. Louisville, national champions, 1980.
Barack Obama, 47 years old, will become the 44th President of the United States. He will be the first African-American President of the United States.
And some tragedies.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, 39 years old and a Nobel Peace Prize winner, And the leader of the nonviolent civil rights movement in the United States was assassinated in Memphis tonight.
At this early stage, we believe that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
But all in all, we've gone through this together.
Today, we're facing some familiar challenges. Except this time, the voices are louder and being heard all over the world.
The Reverend Dr. William E. Summers III made a commitment to Louisville when he launched WLOU.
And that commitment is stronger than ever.
We are the People Station.
We are the original soul of Louisville.
We are WLOU.
For downloads of this and past episodes and information about all the multimedia services we offer, log on to our website at www.markgunmedia.com. That's markgunmedia.com. Welcome back to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I am your host, Mark Gunn, and this time around you are listening to a rebroadcast from my morning show, live in Louisville on WLOU AM and FM in Louisville, Kentucky. This is our mental health break.
The conversation about black mental health continues with Live in Louisville's Mental Health Break with special guest Cassandra and Dr. Kylan Gray of Creative Spirits Behavioral Health Services. Now with a new West End location, 2100 West Chestnut Street. For more information about their services, go to CreativeSpiritsOnline.com. Brought to you by AARP of Kentucky, Family Health Centers, Alante's Jewel Counseling, and Pick Shoes on the original soul of Louisville, 104.7 WLOU.
All right, so we have been talking about mental health, some of the causes, some of the trauma, some of the history. But now we want to talk about resources. There are some things that you can do as an individual to help yourself, and resources that if you want to learn more about how you can be a help to others, right?
Yes.
All right.
One of the number one resources I tell everybody about that is very exciting to me is Psychology Today.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
You can go to Psychology Today and look up therapist, African American, Louisville, Kentucky, or Shelbyville, Kentucky. It'll give you the whole list of people that's within your 50-mile radius. If you have insurance, if it's self-pay, you can plug all that in, and it'll
give you the information.
It'll give you all of that information. There's also Clinicians of Color. That's one of, and it's on Facebook for those that are Facebookers, Clinicians of Color. It'll help you to be able to take a look. There's also, when we talk about self-help, self-care, for those that are dealing with gun violence, there's Mothers Against Violence, Against Gun Violence. There's also, and I know Miss Rose is a part of that move. It's called ACE, ACE. And they have the ACE Center that's here in Louisville. What I'm loving seeing is a lot of the new support, like within the African American community, people are rising up with support groups. One is Women of Intent. Right. And they meet at Goodwill. They're not affiliated with anyone. It's just a community of women that have come together, that are working together in that. There's a program with Angela Mentor, who there's women that just want to provide mentorship for women, and making sure that they have the things that they need. Also, the Celebrate Recovery movement. I'm excited about that. It started in a lot of the more white churches.
Right.
We were able to meet the people that are actually shifting that culturally and putting the Celebrate Recovery within where we are. And so that's one of the movements that we can actually to access and take a look at. So the support groups. Today's Woman.
Right.
With Tawana Bain, she's on that mental health kick. She always has something for us mental health-wise. And I don't know if people are aware, but if those that are for the young generation, the TikTok generation, there's even therapists that have podcasts on TikTok.
Oh yeah.
So those are some things that I know, just self-help wise, and that are these are just grassroots efforts of people that just care and want us to know that.
There's also a couple of agencies that are putting together African American therapists and therapists of color to be a resource for the community. Damon Cobble's Minority Health Project is one of those agencies, and we want to give a shout out to Damon Cobble for the work he's doing there. And then there's this other agency, I cannot remember the name of it. They're pulling together all of the African American therapists that they can find within the region, so that they can give that out on their website, so that people can find that web. And if I find it before we end our time,
I know Louisville Urban League with Sadiqa
Reynolds, right?
She has pulled together a mental health cadre, and this group is actually working to pull African American therapists in so that people can have access. The big thing is trying to create access points,
right,
for people to be able to come in, and so that's important. But if we're talking about self-care and for individual self-care, there's 4 things that I always try to recommend that people take a look at. When we talk about mental health, most of the time people think about, I just need to do something for my mind. But the biggest thing with mental health is it impacts the entire body. It impacts your mind, but that mind, and when it starts producing different chemicals, if we're under a lot of stress, if we're under depression, it starts producing chemicals that starts to impact the heart.
Right.
Stroke, diabetes, cancer. I mean, it starts to impact a lot of those other things. So when we're looking at self-care, we want to look at physical self-care. We want to make sure we're doing something physically, whether I'm walking, whether I'm eating healthy. I want to make sure that I'm incorporating something physical for my self-care. Emotional. I want to be able to look at my stress. I want to be able to take a look at being able to manage it in ways that are more healthy. I want to take a look at my emotions and take a look at where they all are. Where's my emotions? Am I high strung today? Am I low? Where am I?
Right.
Becoming aware of that. I also tell people, let's look at social. Social self-care is very important. Having good support systems, having good boundaries, having good communication, making sure that I have time together with the important people, taking the time instead of working all the time or working and sleeping all the time. Let's make sure that we're putting some good social pieces in. And then spiritual. Our spirituality is the number one thing. It's one of the number one keys to help us to heal. And so those are the 4 things that I tell all of my clients, and we try to incorporate those things in as we're putting together their care plan, their self-care plan.
All right, so as we wrap up, because this has been, I could go on with this forever, because this has been such an intriguing and interesting conversation. If folks wanted to get a hold of Creative Spirits, how can they do that?
You can reach us online at creativespiritsonline.com. You can reach us on any social media, Creative Spirits Behavioral Health. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. So you can look up Creative Spirits Behavioral Health. You can also reach us by phone at area code 502-254-9555. And those are our numbers. Those are the ways you can connect with us.
And, one of the reasons why we did this is because, we have the attention span of a gnat sometimes. You have a big issue like Will Smith and Chris Rock. People talk about it. They get salacious with it. They theorize. They speculate, but they ignore the underlying issues. We saw the underlying issues and thought, this is something that's important to talk about. And this won't be the first or the last conversation that we have on this. I have an initiative that I started a couple of weeks ago called the Check-In Challenge that I've been talking about. Little bitty, seems innocuous on its surface, but it does help bring attention to the issue. So basically, I want you to check in with the men in your life. Send a text message, 1 question, 2 words. You good? It helps to bring a little love to them, a little more support that we need to be showing each other, and it also helps to heighten the whole issue of mental health. So we'll be talking more about that as the days and weeks go on. I want to do a follow-up with you guys.
Absolutely.
So we'll talk about that, and we're also going to post this on our Facebook page once I get everything edited and everything. But again, profound thank you both for being here, for helping us to take a mental health break. Hopefully, can I do this before we get out of here? Everybody listening, everybody that's online, everybody that's on your live.
Yes.
Let's do this. Take a nice deep breath. Inhale. Hold it. Slowly exhale. One more time. Breathe in. Hold it. Exhale. Think about how you feel right now. Thank you both. We're going to follow up. We are the original soul of Louisville, 104.7 WLOU.
You've been listening to Live in Louisville's.
You've been listening to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and not reflective of any business entity or anyone associated with this broadcast. If you have any comments or want more information on how to be a sponsor, log on to our website at markgunmedia.com or call us at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Thank you for listening.
Mark Gun Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.